Charlotte Crew and Viscount Torrington, good morning and thank you for joining us on G&T.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure. Charlotte, let's start with you. When did primogeniture first register with you personally as an issue?
Well, it is something very personal to me in that I married a man who will inherit a title one day. It never came up in any way until we struggled to have children. I had many miscarriages, and eventually I had a daughter. So everyone was delighted, as you can imagine. We were absolutely thrilled that we had our baby. My parents-in-law were delighted. My husband, no one in the immediate family was anything but thrilled. But there were lots of comments about what a shame it wasn't a boy, and you must try again. And a son and an heir raised its head. And I couldn't believe that in 2015, that would be an issue for everyone. I had never realized it, I never thought about the fact that there may be a problem that a girl wouldn't be the right baby to have. But as I can say, it definitely wasn't from my family, my husband's family.
So you began this campaign so your daughter could end up inheriting your husband's baronetcy one day. And that was the genesis of daughters' rights.
Yes, I mean, it was founded on the principle that there should be no section of society where daughters are treated differently from sons. That's the basic inequality of it, that daughters are not treated with the same worth and of the same value as sons. And there are obviously consequences for this. The first consequence would be the seats in the House of Lords. And the 92 seats reserved for hereditary peers in the House of Lords, because of the principle of male primogeniture, they can only be held by men, with rare exception. And the by-elections, as they currently exist today, were elections created by men for men, which only men can participate in, and that is outrageous.
And there are 92 of those, of course, in the House of Lords. So that's whatever it is.
Chamber.
1/8 of the upper chamber reserved for men.
Is reserved for men.
Yeah. So I'm saying you've described primogeniture as the last state-sponsored act of sexual discrimination.
Yes.
That's how you see it.
Yes. This is the last state-sponsored sex discrimination. So nowhere does it exist where you absolutely have to have it in order to do something, or to so male primogeniture exists, so you can inherit a hereditary title, and that means you can stand in the by-elections to the 92 seats in the House of Lords. But it doesn't exist anywhere else. But the problem is, the reason why it matters is this is culturally entrenched. The patrilineal line is supported by the practice of male primogeniture, and this is endemic in the whole country through all communities. Synergy Bank created some research at the beginning of last year, and they asked high street businesses, small local businesses, whether they would consider handing their businesses on to sons or daughters. And men were 50% more likely to inherit a small family business than a woman was. So this permeates the whole of society. So this is the only place where it's still legal, but this is why we must make a stand. This position is indefensible. There's absolutely no reason why it's incompatible with the values of today, that we let this persist.
Well, your campaign and your arguments have been tagged feminism for aristocrats, which I suppose is not factually incorrect. But to those who say, quite frankly, these are rich people's problems. I mean, fine, this may be a historical anomaly, but there are better things in the world to be caring about now. What's your answer? Why should everyone else really be bothered by this?
Well, we understand that this applies to a few people, but the wider principle of equality applies to all women. And this is the issue that we want to consider. This is the template for gender discrimination, and we have to eradicate it at the top. We can't let the privilege be protected from the laws, particularly if hereditary peers want to be part of the legislative process and create the laws that govern the land, then they must also adhere to the laws that govern the land. At the moment, they're exempted from the 2010 Equalities Act. And that's just not a position that's justifiable or supportable.
Now, I think you've tried a few times before with various helpers in Parliament, supported MPs. Philip Davis tried to introduce a 10-minute rule bill last year, didn't get very far,
Right,
didn't get
yes.
government support, of course. But I understand that Downing Street is now looking afresh at this very reform to abolish male heirs inheriting titles, and they're also looking quite favourably at it as well.
Well, we understand that from the Prime Minister's video, where he supported 50-50 Parliament, he is the first Prime Minister to commit to this and to look at it seriously. And of course, in order to do that, he will have to end the practice of male primogeniture. So we welcome the fact that this has been taken very seriously, and that they are sympathetic and supportive of this matter. Have
you been told what they're going to do yet by anybody?
Well, no, we haven't been told anything. I hope very much that we may see this in the Queen's speech, but I don't know.
And in the past, when you've brought this up and government have said no, I think you've met ministers in the past and government have refused to help. What were their objections previously?
Well, we keep being told that it is a complex matter, and therefore it's too difficult and they can't think of a fair way of doing it. But Brexit was complex. Ending male primogeniture is incredibly simple. We've drafted the bill is ready to go. It's super simple, it's 4 clauses. So it would take very little legislative time, and we are prepared to make any amendments should they want to talk to us. But yes, the position at the moment, if it's too complex, is not a justification for impeding this passage through Parliament.
Viscount Torrington, can I bring you in now? You're backing this reform and Charlotte's campaign for personal reasons as well as political ones. Could you tell us why?
Well, I'm a peer of the realm with 3 daughters. Obviously, wistfully, my wife and I wished perhaps that we might have had a son, but I've had other members of my family who've gone through producing 4 daughters without any luck. So we decided to call a halt. But I mean, the simple answer is that I have an heir presumptive, i.e. a very distant cousin who's a Canadian citizen, lives in Vancouver. I've never met him. I'm sure he's a very decent bloke, but I have a daughter, I have 3 daughters, but the eldest daughter is very well educated. She's got 3 degrees. She's the editor of what I might reasonably call a national magazine. And she suddenly woke up to the idea that it really was pretty unfair that she couldn't inherit the title and join the Lords if she was voted in. So I think we had a family discussion and agreed to back it.
And I understand it's not just yourself, it's actually got quite a lot of support amongst your fellow hereditary peers, not known necessarily for their radicalism and their embracing of reform perhaps, but you've done a recent survey and the majority of hereditaries agree with you.
Well, it was quite a small survey, I'd have to admit. The majority of them were in favour, and those who weren't in favour were back on the idea, oh, we don't want the surname to go, at least the surname must go with the peerage, and oh, well, you know, there are problems about entails and so on. I think all of these are solvable. I mean, the easiest one of all is the surname one. I give you an example of Lord Errol. The surname of the Errol family was Hay, but it went as a Scottish title. It went down through the female line, and Puffin Hay, as she was named, married Lord Sir Ian Moncrieff of that ilk, and they've solved the problem that Merlin, the present Earl, has kept the surname Hay, and his brother is Moncrieff. And you know, that all seems to work perfectly happily.
It does. You need a strong brain to follow all that, but it does sound like it's easily fixable. But when this was changed for the monarchy in 2011, when it became the eldest child would inherit the throne, whether it's a boy or a girl, big legal change then. Why didn't the law change for all titles in 2011?
Well, I think Charlotte would go along with this, that we all hoped that it would be easier to change the law as a result of that. But because the law was actually a bit of a paper tiger, because the firstborn was a son, it sort of, the enthusiasm for greater changes sort of died a natural death, really.
Charlotte, do you know why? It would have been an obvious thing for the government to have done in 2011 if they're doing it for the monarchy.
Yeah, so Mark Harper, who was Minister of the Constitution at the time, he wrote a letter in response to the Public Administration and Constitutional Reform Committee saying that although inheritance laws were discriminatory and they were incompatible with modern values, they couldn't think of a fair way of implementing them and therefore weren't going to do it. And this is the answer that we get repeatedly, that they can't think of a fair way to do it. But it's institutionalized discrimination, and it can't be that you can't think of a fair way to manage it. You know, we have done a bill that's incredibly simple. It has got a massive support in the House of Lords. The majority of the hereditary peers in the House of Lords, and Lord Grocott himself, who would rather abolish the by-elections, has also agreed to support the bill. So there is absolutely, we have cross-party support, we have support from the hereditary peers. There's no reason why it can't be put through. I mean, to be honest, we're mystified.
Well, you live in New Hope, of course, but you're undergoing a legal challenge as well, are you not? If your powers of persuasion fail on Downing Street again, obviously sounding like it's quite hopeful this time, but you're pursuing the government through the European Court of Human Rights too.
Yes, we have a case at the European Court of Human Rights on behalf of 5 daughters of peers who would like to stand in the by-elections but can't because of their gender. And Viscount Torrington's daughter Harriet is one of the candidates. Lord Panic is lead counsel, and he believes that we have a very strong case. We are waiting to hear back from the European Court of Human Rights, but we're very hopeful that they will support our position. There is precedence for it from other European countries. So yes, we're very confident.
Now, Lord Torrington, one argument made by some in government, I think you touched on it, is that the British Constitution is a pretty messy thing, isn't it? And if you start pulling at one thread, albeit well-intentioned, the whole thing could unravel quite quickly. For example, some may jump up and say, well, hang on a minute, what are we even doing with hereditary peers sitting in the House of Lords? Why do you get a place, boy or girl, in the Lords because of your birth rather than what you've done in life? What do you say to that?
Well, the British Constitution has evolved over time, and it evolves generally in the right direction, but not too fast. And the answer is the hereditary peerages were part of the settlement of the British Constitution. Then we had life peers, who I suppose somewhat naughtily were called day boys by their hereditary colleagues in the Lords. And finally, the day boys chucked the borders out largely. But the settlement is that there's 92 or 100 peers hereditary peers left, and I think that's reasonable. They still represent a proportion of society. They're not all landowners or big business owners. In fact, I think there are more big business owners in the House of Lords as life peers than there are hereditary, that's for sure. But it's a continuity, I think, which is important.
But you don't toy with the British Constitution at your peril.
Well, we toyed with the British Constitution quite a lot just recently, haven't we? I mean, we've virtually brought about a situation where Scotland may go off on its own, Northern Ireland may go off on its own one day. The Welsh, I don't think, have really serious ambitions, but that's a huge change we've made. And many people say the Lords does need further reform. I mean, it needs perhaps to become the Senate of the United Kingdom, rather than in a way it sort of is, but it isn't it? Because Scotland really doesn't take much notice. So
that is another big argument, Charlotte.
I just think it's worth pointing out here that as a campaign, we don't endorse the peerage or the composition of the House of Lords, but just the indefensible position that as it currently stands, and there doesn't appear to be any appetite for wholesale reform, either socially or of the House of Lords, that we can't support the indefensible position of not allowing women to participate in 1/8 of the chamber.
Okay, you're not standing for that. That's understood. Charlotte, just to finish, back to you again. Since your daughter's birth, you've also now had a son as well. Congratulations on that, after the troubles you went through to have children, of course. But do you feel as passionately now you've got a son who could inherit this baronetcy after all, for your daughter still to be the one who should get it?
Yes, I do, because there are all sorts of things in life that are unfair. But the fact that she is a girl shouldn't be held in any way against her. So there are all sorts. You are allowed to discriminate for various reasons on age. So you could say why primogeniture at all, but you are allowed to discriminate on age. So look, it's not my chosen way of life, but it exists, and I just want to remove the gender barrier on it. I think most people who'll be listening to this, most people won't realise there still exists male primogeniture, especially not the consequences primarily in the House of Lords, and they'll be absolutely staggered. And I think most people will support the fact that whether you agree with the peerage or not, you just have to remove the gender barriers from it.